Hello there, and welcome to Citizen Academy's Game Commentary Series. So let's get started, shall we? Now, straight away, I should explain to you the title of this video. Is Star Citizen Pay to Fail? Now, I would imagine your initial reaction to that title was, what the hell is this guy talking about? Well, that is precisely the reaction I was trying to get out of you guys, because in my point of view, at least, saying that Star Citizen is pay to win is the same thing as saying Star Citizen is pay to fail. In other words, it's complete rubbish. Now, I know a lot of you out there are going to disagree with me, but keep in mind, this is just the opinion of one individual. There are those of you who say that Star Citizen is pay to win, and you have what you consider to be valid claims for that belief. I just happen to disagree with that point of view. Anyway, let's get on with the commentary. Now, since there is no way to actually win at Star Citizen, those claiming that Star Citizen is pay to win obviously mean something else. So I gave this a lot of thought over the past couple of days, and I've come up with, I believe, is a really good definition of pay to win. And that is using real-world money to buy in-game assets which provide the player with an advantage over other players who cannot earn those same assets in-game or would otherwise take a very long time to earn in-game. Now, within Star Citizen, none of this is going to apply to the game. There will be no in-game assets that can only be bought with real money cash. Everything that people are buying now, the ships, the weapons, the shields that they are paying cash for, all those items you will be able to purchase with in-game earned credits. So right there you can see that there is no advantage given to people who are buying ships today before the game has even launched. What some people claim. Now, I spent a lot of time reading the RSI forums, the forums on Reddit, and on a few other message boards that are devoted to Star Citizen. And I have seen lots of posts on these forums where people say that spending tons of cash on Star Citizen is insane, it's stupid, you're a fool if you do this. However, you will notice that such people never come out and state specifically why they think buying ships right now is stupid. Now, in my view, what they're saying, in effect, is that because they would never spend so much cash on ships, no one else should either. I mean, all of their arguments are so lacking in support that this is basically what their claims boil down to. However, such people ignore the fact that most people buy those cool-looking spaceships in order to help fund the development of Star Citizen in the first place. I mean, look, these people are not stupid. They realize that once Star Citizen is launched, that they will be able to earn the credits in-game to buy those very same ships. In essence, they will be able to get them free of charge. They are spending all that money in order to support the game itself. And that's it. Now, another claim is that those who buy lots of ships before Star Citizen is launched will supposedly have an advantage over others who join the game afterwards, since these new people will have to start with little or nothing and have to compete unfairly with those who already have vast quantities of game assets. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a fairly reasonable claim. Sounds fairly logical, straightforward. However, is this really true? Let's shine a little bit of light on their claims. The obvious counterpoint to this claim is, how is this different from a player coming into a game a few years after launch and facing other more advanced players who got into the game at the very start? So, for example, let's say it wasn't even possible to buy ships in Star Citizen before the game was launched, and everybody started at ground zero on the first day of launch. A person coming in 6 months later into the game will face the exact same scenario as what will happen when Star Citizen actually does launch. That brand new player will be coming into the game with very few game assets and will be facing those who have far more assets in the game. And the same thing happens with pretty much every online game that has ever been created. You've got players who have been in the game for years and have built up a lot of in-game assets, and you have those who just come into the game many years after launch and start out with next to nothing. There's no difference between the way Star Citizen is being set up and with those games. And also, this is the same thing that happens in real life. I mean, a person just starting their career at a company does not get paid as much as someone who has worked at that same company for 20 or 30 years. That person has far more experience, far more assets, if you want to use that term, as a person just coming into the company. So in this way, Star Citizen, the way it's going to operate, is going to be a pretty good reflector of how events unfold in real life in the first place. Now, the only advantage to buying ships now is that doing so buys you a little bit of time at the start of the game, because you don't have to spend time playing the game to earn game assets to save up enough to buy those ships. But that's all it gets you. So my thought is that maybe some people are just jealous of those who can afford to buy ships before Star Citizen is even launched. Could it all just boil down to that one simple statement? I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh. Possible solutions. So let's assume that this pay-to-win scenario is an actual problem in the Star Citizen game. How should it be resolved? Well, CIG could nerf or handicap everybody who bought all the ships that were pre-bought before the game was launched. And what this means is that the ships that were pre-bought would be made weaker in certain ways to sort of balance them out with people just coming into the game fresh, to sort of throw in a little bit of fairness to the brand new players. Well, all this would do is serve to discourage people wanting to help fund the game. And furthermore, this would disrupt game balance. So how would CIG determine in what manner to handicap various ships? And then once that new player has been in the game for, say, 6 months to 9 months, should his ships be handicapped to make it fair for those coming into the game at that point? You can see how this would really throw a wrench into the works and just totally mess up the game. This may also open up a Pandora's box of issues, such as, should somebody who plays Star Citizen 40 hours a week be handicapped over people who can only play the game 5 hours per week? I mean, after all, to a certain extent, this amounts to something called play to win, not to be confused with pay to win, where you have the hardcore gamers who are just spending all their free time playing Star Citizen, doing whatever they can to get ahead in the game, while those who can only play for a couple hours and who aren't really serious about the game don't make as much progress. So should those hardcore players be handicapped just to make it fair for the less enthusiastic players? Now, the bottom line here is, in my opinion, players with less cash to spend or less time to play Star Citizen should not be given any special considerations whatsoever. And I realize some of you listening to this may disagree, but hey, that's why there's a place in this video where you can leave comments and let me know what you think. So if you disagree with me so far, leave me a comment and tell me why. Now let's talk a little bit about the reality of Star Citizen. Now, while it's true that there are a lot of people out there who have bought big, massive ships that are far more powerful than the puny little $35, $40 ships. However, keep this in mind. Bigger ships need paid crew members. They can't be flown solo. Some of these ships need 4, 5, 7, 8 crew members in order to run the ship at its best. They also need missiles, ammunition, repairs, maintenance to a far, far greater extent than just a little tiny solo ship. So the overhead cost for these bigger ships is going to be very, very significant. This means that it's going to be quite a challenge to fly and operate these bigger ships at the start of the game due to the expenses of doing so. And what this also means is, in my opinion, I think that lots of players, even if they have a whole fleet of ships, they may end up starting out with their smaller ships because of the reasons stated above. The idea here being that they start small, earn credits a little bit at a time, work their way up the economic ladder until they can afford to operate those bigger ships that they pre-bought a long time ago. One also has to consider the aspect of competition in the Star Citizen universe. Let's take mining the asteroids, for example. Using big cargo haulers for tiny jobs in the asteroid belts would not be economically realistic due to the huge upfront costs. So if you have an RSI Orion, you're not going to spend your time mining a little tiny bit of ore from a little tiny asteroid and then perhaps moving on to the next little tiny asteroid and mining all the ores in that one. You're going to be looking for the really huge deposits on the really huge asteroids. And you're going to leave all the smaller ones for the other guys. In other words, in general, the small paying jobs are going to be left untouched by those who have the bigger, more powerful ships. And this is going to leave a lot of opportunities for players just getting into the game, because there will be all these little tiny jobs that they will find affordable and economical to take on that the big boys will just totally ignore. So that shoots a really big hole, I think, in this whole idea of pay to win. Now, here are a few things to keep in mind. Star Citizen is a game of skill. Having more ships and more powerful ships does not negate personal skill. Also, more expensive does not necessarily equal better. There is not a progression of ship quality based upon price. So you can have a ship that costs $400 versus a ship that costs $100, and that more expensive ship may not be as good as doing certain tasks as the less expensive ship, and of course vice versa. Also, when it comes down to getting into dogfights and such, superior tactics and strategy can outperform ship strength. What this means is that a little tiny inexpensive fighter ship could, with a highly skilled pilot, totally obliterate a much larger and powerful ship that is crewed by a bunch of incompetent know-nothings. And then there is this little fact. 90% of the population in the Star Citizen universe is going to be NPC characters or computer-generated characters. So the vast majority of encounters you will have are going to be with computer-generated characters in the first place. So all these people who have all these ships stored up before Star Citizen even launches, you're only going to be encountering those people 10% of the time anyway. Now, within the Star Citizen game, there is going to be the ability to purchase UEC credits with real money. But that does not necessarily mean you'll be able to purchase ships indirectly with real money. The first thing to consider is that buying ships with UEC credits would end up taking a very long time to do. And the reason for this is that there will be a 25,000 UEC credit purchase limit each day that you can buy with real money, and a 150,000 credit max in your online account on the RSI website. Now, assuming that the 1,000 to 1 ratio is kept in place, in other words, 1,000 UEC currently cost $1, assuming that's kept in place, it would take you 6 days to save up enough UEC credits for a $150 ship. But the thing is, you could just earn that number of credits in-game fairly easily in perhaps even less than 6 days. So why put forth your own cash in the first place? But of course, none of this really matters anyway, because the ships for cash store will be shut down when the game launches. So you're not going to be able to do that anyway. Now, these purchased UEC credits that you buy for real money, you will be able to, at most, use these credits to buy ship upgrades, replacement parts, and so on, but you're not going to be able to buy entire ships with it. In conclusion, Star Citizen is still in early alpha, okay? So reaching conclusions about game dynamics right now is premature at best. At the very start of when Star Citizen launches, there may be a small advantage for those who have pre-bought ships, but this advantage will not last for very long. I would imagine within 3, 6, at the most 9 months, any advantage that such people would have would be long erased. Much of Star Citizen works the same as in real life. I mean, let's face it, not everyone is equal in terms of assets or abilities. And that's the way it's going to be in Star Citizen. And for those of you who have been whining about how it's not fair, that all these people have all these pre-bought ships, and they're going to have such a huge advantage over other players, well, look, guys, there will always be other players who have a greater advantage than you do. This is called life. Get used to it. Now, here's a point that I thought up that I've not seen on any of the online forums yet, and that is that buying tons of ships and weapons now somewhat dilutes the purpose of the game in the first place and may reduce the value one places on their game assets. And the reason why I say this is that a person who starts with nothing and has to scratch and crawl to make their way in the Star Citizen universe and starts out with a really tiny ship and over months and months works their way up to bigger and better ships and better weapons and better shields, that person has a lot of time invested in the game, a lot of effort, a lot of tactics and strategies that person has invested in the game to get where they are now, where they can afford the bigger and better ships. Whereas the other guys just opened up their wallet and threw a whole mess of money at a ship and poof, they have the ship. So again, and this is just my opinion, I think that to a certain extent, those who have to start from ground zero and struggle a long time to get what they've got are going to have a far greater appreciation and put far greater value on their ships than a person who just bought them outright. Now, another point that relates a little bit to my previous point is that starting off at ground zero helps establish a strong financial foundation for buying the bigger ships later on. And I say this because it relates to a previous point I made where those who have these really huge ships may not necessarily be able to afford to operate them at the very start, just because of the huge outlay in overhead that it's going to cost to run these ships efficiently. So I think that starting off at ground zero and gradually working up to the bigger ships and saving up your money and building up your assets on a slow, evolving process will make for a far more economically sound manner of eventually operating those bigger ships. Also, something else to consider in this pay-to-win scenario is that players just starting out at game launch can just pay, let's say, $35, $45, and all the other game assets they'll be able to earn with in-game credits and essentially get all those other ships and assets free of charge. However, early backers of Star Citizen will have paid tons of cash for the very same ships. So which of the above two choices is the best one? Spending thousands of dollars on ships now or getting them later on for free? But then again, this point of view only makes sense if you leave out the fact that people are spending all that money in order to help fund Star Citizen. And here's another point that relates back to that play-to-win situation I was talking about earlier. Star Citizen is going to be rewarding for hardcore gamers and those with less time on their hands. Now, what this is going to do is create a far more diverse set of players within the game, and that's going to improve the quality of Star Citizen overall. All right, now let's come to some final conclusions about this whole pay-to-win situation. Now, in my opinion, the question of pay-to-win seems to focus on the in-game rather than the journey. And by that I mean it seems to focus on getting all the best game assets rather than the journey one partakes in on the road to getting those assets. Now, something else that weakens the pay-to-win argument is that there are no predetermined set goals or ultimate finish to Star Citizen. There is no way to win, as I mentioned before, and there are no preset goals that you're in competition with other players to try to get to. The fact is that there are going to be hundreds of thousands of players, each pursuing different goals in a variety of different ways. So where a stronger player gains an advantage over here, a weaker player may find a better advantage over there based upon their particular gameplay style and their particular goals. So those who claim that pay-to-win gives an unfair advantage to those who have a whole fleet of ships at the very start of Star Citizen are only looking at one aspect of the game. They're not looking at a player's particular tactics and strategies, at their goals, at how they go about gaining assets in the game, and a host of other issues. And finally, Star Citizen is about your own personal adventures and the stories that you create for yourself. And that, I think, sums up really nicely at the core what Star Citizen is all about. It's not about one player having an advantage over another player, or one player having a bigger badass ship than some other player. It's about getting out there, having fun, having adventures, and creating a legacy for yourself within the Star Citizen universe. Well, there you have it, my commentary on why pay-to-win does not apply to Star Citizen. Now, I realize full well that talking about pay-to-win is sort of a hot-button issue when it comes to Star Citizen, and a lot of people out there have very strong opinions one way or another. I imagine a lot of you listening to this video are going to totally disagree with a lot of what I've said. Hey, that's cool. You know, everybody has the right to their opinion. So here's a little favor I want to ask. If there is something about this video you totally disagree on, leave me a comment. Just try to be, nice about it. Don't try to flame my comments on my video. And if you're nice, I will respond to you. If you're mean, I will ignore you. However, if you totally agree with everything I've said and you think that all my opinions are just a stroke of genius, then hey, why not show how much you really support my channel by clicking on that little red subscribe button down below. Until next time, this is Citizen Academy, wishing all of you fame and fortune in the verse.